Welcome back, or welcome to the Rebel Tech Podcast, where we discuss the promises and perils of emerging technology and the social, political, and policy landscape in Texas. I'm Zach Whiting, Policy Director and Senior Fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We're in the middle of a series exploring the top technology legislative priorities for TPPF in the 2025 legislative session. Today, we're going to discuss cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. And I know this is an issue near and dear to your heart, David. You've spearheaded our excellent research and engagement on the issue, so I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yeah, well, Zach, it's good to be back. And, I think we were chit-chatting before this. For tens of fans that are watching that have just been waiting with bated breath, where are the tech bros? Where have we been? It feels like it's been so long. What have we been up to for the last, month and a half since we've done one of these?
Yeah, well, we're back, and It has been a long time, and it is good to be back. And primarily we've been focused on finishing up our research. Mm-hmm. We have a comprehensive artificial intelligence research paper that we've been working on. I think it's going to be one of the best papers and research products that'll be available to Texas lawmakers this session. And so we put a lot of work into that. I think it's a very strong product, and I'm hopeful that it will help move the needle on strong policy on artificial intelligence, which we've talked about in other podcasts. But today we want to start out with just a wild story, and I think our viewers are going to love this. So before we get into some of the substantive questions on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure, I want to talk about a hearing that you testified at last week in Tyler, Texas. It was very eventful. The live stream was hacked by purported Russian actors. So can you tell us a little bit more about that hearing and then maybe how it ended?
Well, it's funny that we're starting a podcast episode talking about something that maybe 30 people watch, which is the live stream of an off-site hearing for an issue. But to your point, it ended up being this very calamitous event. So for folks who don't know what we're talking about here, the House, under Speaker Dade Phelan, created a select committee which is focused on securing Texas from our most rogue hostile foreign nations, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and so on. And the idea for these hearings is let's have experts come in and talk about the myriad threats that we're seeing. So in one of the hearings, we had one of our VPs here, Chuck DeVore, basically tell stories about ways that China was infiltrating the California Assembly when he was in the legislature. Some of the concerns we're seeing with supply chains, not just with the COVID pandemic, but all manner of infrastructural projects and supplies that we rely on China for. So it's really been building this narrative in these interim hearings about the threats that these foreign nations pose to our state of Texas. And I'd say, last session, there was a lot of discourse on should we disallow Chinese officials or Chinese residents from purchasing land in Texas. And that's really been the impetus for more policy discussions on it. And I guess up front, to be clear, why TPPF has been a part of this is we've been pushing on all fronts to secure the way of Texas's life from these rogue actors. And so to get to your point, this hearing, I, in grad school and at the foundation and working together with you, of course, I spent a lot of time digging into water system cybersecurity, which I think, if you're just in the water policy space, you're like, how does this necessarily relate? Or I guess I shouldn't say that, because if you're in the water policy space, the relation. But for folks who are more looking at the critical infrastructure, they think water and they think, oh, we have a need for more of this precious resource, which is absolutely the case. But with the cybersecurity component, we're seeing more and more vulnerabilities in these systems, and we'll get into that. So this hearing, I'm invited to provide testimony talking about how Russia has attacked in Muleshoe, Texas most recently, a critical water system, flooding the water tower and getting to the point, almost up to the point where they could have totally disbarred this city's ability to distribute water to its constituencies. And so I provide this testimony alongside a cybersecurity expert at the University of Texas at Tyler. And there's our panel and the one preceding us. There are folks in critical infrastructure, the Texas Pipeline Association, ERCOT is there, And the emerging theme that we're talking about is Russia, in particular, sees the soft targets in our public and precious critical infrastructure. So we provide the invited testimony. It was a very engaging discussion, which we can get more into. And I drove out to Tyler, and so I had to make it back to Austin, Texas later that afternoon for a couple of meetings. And so I leave around noon or so, and I start getting texts and emails from folks who are watching the hearing. And hey, congrats on getting your testimony in before all mayhem ensued. I'm like, what are you guys talking about mayhem? Like, did something happen to public non-invited testimony? And then I get a call from a cybersecurity professor at UT Austin. And he's one of the professors I worked with in kind of building out this research before coming to the foundation. And he said, hey, really fascinating that you guys provided all this testimony on Russia's potential threat to public infrastructure, and Russia hacked into this live stream. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Sure enough, the live stream for this hearing was hacked into, and you can go on Twitter, you can look this up. There were videos playing of Russian propaganda on what was supposed to be the live stream of this hearing, where we could hear from folks about these threats. There was a video of a cat smoking a joint. There was all this weird, just asinine stuff happening. And what I want to clarify for some of the discourse that was happening on Twitter, there was this thought that, okay, it's a Zoom, there was a boomer who set this up, they didn't know what they're, no. Chair Hefner, who chairs this select committee, started the hearing by thanking the IT professionals who were present, the whole team of IT staff that was there with the University of Texas at Tyler, to ensure the security of the system remained intact so we could have this Zoom, so we could have this live stream. So this was a robust cyber secure operation that was infiltrated. We don't know exactly who it was by. The Russian propaganda has raised a lot of eyebrows, mine included, yours as well. I know we've had discussions about this, and we'll wait to see. Maybe we'll find out, is anyone going to take credit for this attack? I think the point that's really sad, and you can say this, Zach, as a former legislator, is that now the people of Texas are deprived the discussions that ensued during this testimony.
Yes.
And that's not to say for the folks that were invited, yeah, we're invited. We represent the foundation, different agencies. But for the public that drove all the way to Tyler, now that is corrupted information that isn't saved in the archive of the Texas legislature, which can influence the reporting and subsequent legislation that happens. So there's a real effect. It's not just cutesy cat smoking a joint. This affects the legislative process.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think those points are important to drill down on. This is not, some kid in their, mom's basement or, at their lunch break at school, just, hacking in and, making goofy memes and jokes and stuff. This is, you have two layers. You have an official state government hearing, and you have the layer of a university system, and those layers were penetrated, and it really goes to whoever is behind this attack. It's someone sophisticated. We don't know if it's Russians, but it could well be. It is a threat, and it interferes with the operations of government. It interferes with, to your point, the ability of constituencies to get safe, reliable information, or just factual information about what happened, and so it's not hyperbole. This is a big problem,
and it's an institution of higher education of the University of Texas system that was infiltrated too. This isn't some private corporation. Not to say AT&T getting hacked isn't an issue. It is, but this is a public institution funded by taxpayer dollars. So the irony, not even irony, but the interconnectedness of these issues is not lost on the chair, the members of this committee, and for that matter, the work we're doing to make sure we get this right next session.
Good. Well, a lot of times you say the more vocal a response something is, it shows that you're over the target, and it shows that Texas, that lawmakers, and you and your testimony in the foundation were over the target. So that's great. So I
will say to that point, if I can. I actually, you saying this isn't hyperbole, there was a conversation I had with somebody who was in attendance for that hearing, and grateful for the testimony that organization others provided, and she jokingly, but then kind of realistically said, for all the folks who are watching that, their names were on the Zoom, and if it was Russia, all their names are now accounted for. And I think this gets to the point of there's so much discourse happening about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and it gets lost on deaf ears because we hear it so often. I just, for folks watching, Texas is a threat to countries like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
Yes.
And we're seeing this in numerous ways. And I think hopefully this is a good jumping off point for this discussion, because tech, when we started this, we were absolutely thinking about national security. But when we get more into AI, which you led with talking about our AI paper, national security, we're seeing more and more and more targets emerging for these actors. So I just wanted to put that out there, because vigilance on the part of individual Texans is key too, not to fearmonger, but to be real and raw about what we're facing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The topic is cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, and you think back, even 20, 30, 40 years ago, the cyber component wasn't such a big piece of it. It was the physical security. And so, do you have fences and barbed wire fences, and the concerns about leaky pipes? Like those were the concerns about keeping your critical infrastructure, your water system secure.
Well, that's a great point, Zach. Can we hit on that for a second? Because okay, you're a homeowner, right?
Yep.
Do you have a fence around your backyard?
Apparently every Texas house.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. But walls do work. Is that what you're getting at here? Have you had to do any repairs in your fence?
Yes, and we have more that are coming this fall.
And I'm cheating because I know the answer to that. But the point is, nothing happened in your backyard, as far as I know, where somebody broke in through the fence, or there was an animal that got out, or your son or daughter. Like, nothing happened. But because you can see the vulnerability, of course, you want to preempt any of those things from happening, so you're going to fix it. And 20, 30 years ago, we weren't thinking about that with cybersecurity.
Yes.
And one of the stats that we pulled together, I'm going to make sure I have it right here. Okay. A 5,220% increase in cybersecurity incidents in the last 2 decades.
Yep.
It's because we don't see the holes in those fences, because they're not in front of us every single day. What's tangible is physical. What is more ephemeral and almost like theoretical is the cyberspace, until we see instances such as Muleshoe, Texas, where Russians are attacking our water system, or we see instances like the Colonial Pipeline attack, where millions, tens of millions of Americans are waiting hours and hours and hours to get gasoline in their cars because our biggest pipeline is down on the Eastern Hemisphere. So what is for physical a recognition, okay, there's a gap, let's fix it. For cybersecurity, it's often not seen until the impact and decimation occurs.
Yes, with physical infrastructure, you see the bolt cutters that cut through the fence, and you can see that. And it's kind of to the point of that Zoom meeting is, to the hearing, people can hack in and they can see, okay, these are all the people that were on the call. I mean, and that's a serious thing. But the type of infiltration that can happen, and folks getting into systems, the amount of detail that and data that can be compromised, and it is often not known about until after the fact, like what happened in Muleshoe. And I was just recently drove through Hale Center, up in the Panhandle. So let's drill down.
Sure.
I mean, I think maybe we did answer this question before, but so you talked about Muleshoe, which was an attack on a city in Texas
by Russian cyber terrorists.
You had the attempted infiltration at Hale Center, another city in Texas. One of the big incidents is in Oldsmar, which is in Florida. So maybe you could talk about that.
Sure.
And then we also have the FBI director, that has commented and comments on this frequently, and does not hold back, and points out that it is hostile foreign actors that are doing this. So we've kind of talked about the bleak nature of it, and the media is reporting on it. But is it as bleak as as the media is reporting, as the FBI director is reporting?
It's bleaker. Yep. It is actually far, far, far bleaker. I don't know why I'm smiling while I'm saying this, because it's the stories. Okay, let's contextualize it this way, then I'll get into Oldsmar. On average, it takes an organization 322 days to notice if there's a data breach or a cybersecurity attack. Yep. Those organizations also include private companies that can have $10 million IT departments, some of the most sophisticated actors to defend our systems, and it's taking them a year to detect when data has been breached. What do you think those numbers are for public systems in Hale Center, where you have a population of 10,000 people, in Muleshoe with a population of 5,000 people, where maybe you have one sophisticated IT professional in that entire city?
Yes.
And so the reason why I say it's bleaker, back to the fence analogy, we currently don't know how much these foreign actors have infiltrated our critical infrastructure systems. We know when the attacks happen, when they transpire, but Hale Center, the stat was 37,000 unique attacks to infiltrate the firewall by Chinese cyber terrorists.
Yes.
37,000. So 36,999 occurred before
Yes.
we realized, oh, shoot, Russia's trying to get into our system.
Yes.
Now let's bring it to Oldsmar. Why can that be cataclysmic? So in Muleshoe, the water tower was flooded such that tens of thousands of gallons of water were completely wasted. That's not insignificant,
Yes.
but it's not Oldsmar, which was a remote employee is on site at a water treatment facility, and this is a city, a population count around 20,000. Don't quote me on that, or somebody's going to fact check me. West of Orlando, and it's at a water treatment facility where they have an employee who's there in front of the screen monitoring just the overall IT system they have that's incorporated into their operation technology. So the employee's there and sees the cursor on the screen moving. And the employee's like, doesn't think anything of it because every water system, just like Oldsmar, has TeamViewer or remote in options for employees that are working from home to check on the water treatment to make sure everything is running smoothly, right? And so this employee, thinks nothing of it. Then after a few minutes, starts noticing a very concerted effort clicking through specific areas that reveal some of the more caustic or toxic chemicals that are used to treat water. And so this employee recognizes, oh, shoot, this isn't an employee of our organization. Somebody is trying to poison the water supply and kill everyone in this city. Yeah. Now, I want to be clear. In the last 2 or 3 years since this event transpired, this is about 2021, the FBI is uncertain as to, was this a Russian cyber terrorist? Was this a disgruntled former employee? It doesn't matter.
Yep.
The point is that there are vulnerabilities such that with the ease of accessing one email account,
yes.
one person's dormant account that doesn't work at a water
yes.
system anymore,
yes.
they can jump into a system that can increase the amount of lye in water such that every man, woman, child that ingests that water would die an agonizing, painful, slow death.
Yes. And I mean, and not to, minimize that, but I think it's an important point to bring up that, and this is not an indictment of the folks that work at these facilities, right. That they're, incompetent or whatever. It's the sophistication of the actors that are trying to cause this kind of harm. And so we'll maybe get into some of those policy
sure.
ideas a little bit later on how we can harden our cybersecurity, increase our training and those kinds of things. But I think that's an important point is that, we have folks that are doing everything they can in small towns all across Texas. Yeah. And it is the sophistication of these actors that can cause these types of potentially cataclysmic events. And we haven't seen that in Texas. And God forbid we don't. But that's the kind of threat that we're up against.
Yep.
So we've kind of we've talked about some of the the potential attackers and the risk that they may pose to Texas's water system. But does this just affect water systems where, we're talking about cybersecurity for
right.
critical infrastructure, and a lot of your research is focused on water, but does it affect other areas of critical infrastructure?
Absolutely, unequivocally. And that's, I mentioned the Colonial Pipeline attack, which was a Chinese group that was able to ransomware attack our pipelines and receive millions and millions of dollars in cryptocurrency in response. We've seen Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine has had their grid deactivated by Russian cyber terrorists. We've seen, get ready for this one. The FBI recently unpacked that there was a critical transportation infrastructure network in the US of A. And it's not just, oriented around one city. We're talking a whole node of critical transportation networks. China had infiltrated that and was able to just sit, lurk, lie dormant for over 5 years, going completely unnoticed.
Yes.
And so I guess the point is, obviously it's happening in every sector. And in some, we're able to see more quickly where these threat actors are. In others, we don't know.
Yes.
There could be other countries that are working with China that we haven't seen yet pop up. Now, to bring it into the research and why water has been such a focal point, well, first and foremost, perhaps this is the announcement on the podcast. Zach Whiting and I are also water policy guys. And I don't say that facetiously because cybersecurity for water, we recognize this should be a top priority for our organization to make sure we are ahead of the curve and preventing these cataclysmic attacks from ripping away the Texas way of life. So water policy, yes, but secondarily, one of the statistics that can really crystallize this really quick here, make sure I have everything right. So when we think about cybersecurity vulnerabilities, we think about vectors for entry. What does that mean? It means where are the conduits that these threat actors can find a way into a system? Back to the fence. If you know where the gap is, boom, you're going to run through it with a semi-truck.
Can you climb over it? Can you dig under it?
Exactly. And so this is what, cyber professionals would call the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and protocols that these terrorists are using. So nuclear, there haven't been in the US any massive attacks. We have Stuxnet, which was one of the most infamous attacks ever in the history of cybersecurity. But in Texas, there are 4 nuclear reactors and there are 7,000 water systems. Law of large numbers states that if you have 7,000 of these water systems, you have far more vectors for entry. Okay, let's extrapolate that further. There's 4 nuclear reactors. There's not that many employees, on a per nuclear reactor basis, but 4 versus 7,000, of course, you're going to have far more employees in water systems than in nuclear. Why is that important? Well, 33% of critical infrastructure cybersecurity attacks are enabled by internal personnel. The statistic varies from 85 to probably closer to 95% of cybersecurity attacks are attributed to human error. We're flawed. Cyber terrorists know this. They take advantage of our vulnerabilities, human psychology, and so on. And so there are about 11,000 employees in water systems in Texas, and not everyone, to your point, this isn't malice. Not every system has the resources and the ability to train up their staff. All staff, by the way, not just those working the IT and the OT systems, to make sure they know what is a threatening email, what is something that might be a socially engineered attack, phishing, and so on and so forth. We at the foundation, we like to think we're these erudite professionals that know all. We go through cybersecurity training every single month.
Every month.
And I can say, having talked to our IT team, which we talk to very frequently, we have a lot of folks who fail these phishing tests. It's a constant refinement of learning that we need. And so to bring it back to water and why is it different perhaps in other sectors, one of the findings that we unpacked kind of early on in our research was 54% of successful cybersecurity attacks for critical infrastructure are attributed to what's called valid accounts. And what that means is there is an employee of a water system that no longer works at this exact location. Maybe they just moved on, terminated, doesn't matter. And they have an account, an email set up with this water system, with their state or city as the byline for their email, and the IT team doesn't disable it. Threat actors can find out pretty easily through LinkedIn and other searches, this employee is no longer working here. Let's see if there's still an email that's active. All you have to do is send an email. And you may get an email that says, this employee is no longer working with this organization. So now as the cyber terrorist, oh, cool, the email is still active and nobody's monitoring it. And so they now have basically a direct line vector that is a sandbox for these cyber terrorists to find every which way to infiltrate that account. And they can, oftentimes with success through brute force hacking and other tactics, and go completely unnoticed. When that happens, they get into that account. They can send emails to other employees posing as if they are, an ally, colleague, and so on to socially engineer them. Or in certain cases, they can use that email to hack directly into the network. So that's a really long way of explaining water has so many additional vectors, and with the number of people, the number of systems, the number of computers that are involved, it's a soft target for China, and we're seeing more and more attacks because there's more and more recognition from threat actors. That's an easy way to get in.
So we've laid out a lot of the risks. We've seen some of the examples. What are we doing? Are there in Texas and even nationally, are there agencies or authorities that are working on cybersecurity for our water systems?
It's yes, there are. There's a lot of fragmentation. I think this is where your line is. It's so good. We need not wait for an ineffectual Congress to act on tech policy. In Texas, we're seeing we need not wait for some of these ineffectual agencies to step up and help, because there are so many federal agencies covering cybersecurity, which on paper is great, but in practice we see. Okay, you have the Department of Homeland Security, which has CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. But then you have the FBI, and the FBI has their Internet Crimes Reporting Division. And then you have certain congressional action and oversight. Oh, by the way, the Environmental Protection Agency. I could keep going down the list. And I was talking with a colleague about this. I think one of the connections we can make, what's hard about having what's called stovepiping, where you have so many different agencies that have a vested interest to help and largely support smaller systems like Muleshoe, is the 9/11 model. Now, we're not going to go Alex Jones conspiratorial, but this is an axiom at this point. When you have the CIA and the FBI with their own vested interests to have control over an investigation or to be the heroes to prevent an attack, they're going to hold on to information.
Yes.
Because they want to be the agency to show, hey, we did this, because they have, interest for funding and for getting more staff and resources that they can obtain if they're successful. So that has been an issue, certainly on the federal front. And I'd also say CISA, we've done, of course, a lot of reporting and commentary on some of the censorship that's been happening at the national level. CISA was one of the organizations that was working hand in glove with companies like Meta to censor content that they thought was reprehensibly bad for COVID, for Fauci. So CISA is also a highly weaponized agency, subdivision of an agency of the federal government. So there are lots of issues. To be a little more positive, in Texas, we have TCEQ, we have the DIR, Department of Information Resources, and we have some other local authorities that are overseeing cybersecurity. And what we'd like to see and what we've talked about in our advocacy is to ensure that the appropriate authority in Texas has the oversight it needs to be that point person for these communities that oftentimes don't know who to reach out to, what resources they might have access to, not just in response to an attack, but even more importantly, to prevent the attack. So we have that really atomized landscape at the federal level. Texas, DIR is really seen as the authority on technology for government services in Texas. And, one of our recommendations that we get at is we need to streamline, because this is overwhelming for some of these small systems dealing with so many different folks in the space of cyber. And don't forget, tune in future episodes. We'll go into and talk about our water policy initiative more broadly, some of the challenges that Texas is facing on a waterfront. The last thing I want to talk about is because apparently all we do is write research papers around here. It's not all we do. We do a lot of other things, but you wrote a great research paper, on this issue, and in that you have, I think, some very good and compelling policy recommendations. So what are some of those recommendations? The last thing I'll say, and I really hope that, I don't know how many minutes in we are, to jump into policy. It's my cybersecurity professors in grad school used to say all the time a couple of things. One of which is, why are you law students taking my cybersecurity classes? I took it with a lot of law students, but he wanted to impress upon the lawyers and the public policy professionals such as myself that there isn't a panacea or silver bullet when it comes to cybersecurity policy. And I'm saying that humbly as somebody who works at a think tank where we proffer policy ideas, recognizing that there's a cultural component too that is hard to shape. And we're not in the business of saying we're going to solve all the problems of Texas. We want to highlight the issues and point lawmakers in the direction of good public policy. And the point to distill this here is that when you look at Muleshoe, when the city manager came to testify and explain how challenging it was to work through the process of getting help and feeling like they messed up and they almost resulted in their constituents being killed or harmed by these Russian cyber terrorists, they don't have multi-factor authentication. They don't have strong passwords. They don't have security by default in a lot of their systems. And it's not because they're negligent. It's because this isn't something they even think rises to the top of their priorities. Because as we know, Zach, we've driven across the state of Texas and rural communities. There are a lot of higher order priorities for these communities when it comes to scarce dollars. So why do I say that? Because we want to be mindful of these rural areas and make sure that we're putting forth ideas that are going to be helpful and not onerous. So one of them is career technical education. Yes, TBPF is going to talk about education with cybersecurity. The quick point on this is we have a massive shortage of cybersecurity professionals in the state of Texas, and that number is growing. And historically, there have been some mismatches in how we're investing in these technical education programs. For example, making sure if we have an abundance of professionals going into cosmetology, let's say, maybe we should stop prioritizing funding for cosmetology schools if it's setting up students for failure, not finding gainful employment after they finish their program. Is there a way to realign our incentives with outcomes in funding programs that are going to be high dollar positions?
Yes.
IT and OT professionals is one of those areas where we could see immediate involvement.
Yes.
And I'd say, per the hearing, Representative Terry Wilson had some comments about also career technical education programs that are prioritizing folks working at water systems that know how to manually operate these systems.
Yes.
And that's absolutely something we support too, is making sure there's the dignified, meaningful, high-paying jobs.
Yes.
And college for all isn't working for everyone, isn't a trope, it's a reality.
Yes.
So let's make sure we're focused on investing in programs that are going to help, yes, the cybersecurity preparedness, but the overall dignity of our workforce in Texas. So that's a big one. Kind of to the holistic point, we talked about the streamlining of the critical infrastructure reporting and preventative measures as well as responsive measures. So the Department of Information Resources or another appropriate agency being given that kind of authority over the entire landscape of cyber for critical infrastructure systems. And this kind of comes into the third policy recommendation that DIR could potentially help manage, which is a more robust and required auditing process.
Yeah.
And there's a way to do this where we aren't, holding a gun to a water system provider's head saying, you got to do this audit or we're going to pull your funding. No, This is a rightful role of government, and let's go on the record here for a second to say the preamble of the Constitution states that the role of government is to protect our nation from rogue actors, the national security being a top priority. We should probably prioritize auditing our systems because if we don't know that China's been in an infrastructure system for 6 years and it takes the FBI to figure that out, one of our policy recommendations is let's ensure that we have audits, third-party audits that are working with these water systems so we know just how, I don't want to say woefully underprepared we are, but just how soft to target these systems are. And that's something that through the DIR, through other agencies, we can make sure it's done cost-effectively, prudently, and most importantly, geared toward actionable solutions that provide the transparency to act on subsequent measures. One additional, and then I want to kick to you for a second on AI, if you have any thoughts there. Security by design and default. So I mentioned the muleshoe model of no multi-factor authentication and strong passwords. There's a way to very simply modify the technology procurement process, which is a fancy way of saying water systems have to buy technology, computers, laptops, iPads, and so on. And currently, almost all the vendors that are working with our state, and I can say this as somebody who did a capstone working with a city in Texas who shall not be named. I don't know, I'm trying to leave like an Easter egg here. It's a big one that has a lot of weird people in it.
It may or may not be the one we're in.
Who knows? Working with them on their tech procurement in a large city, even megalopolises don't have those security measures built into the contracts when they're purchasing technology. And so tweaking those contracts to require multi-factor authentication, strong passwords by default into the tech as it's being set up. So cities like Muleshoe, they can have that operationalized from day one rather than do it in response to a cyber attack.
I mean, just like those two things, multi-factor authentication and stronger passwords would do a world of benefit to making it harder. It's not going to change the actions of hostile actors who want to do these things, but it's another layer. It's the spotlight on the fence to deter them from coming in, let's say.
It's perfectly woven in the fence.
I know.
Well, and can I ask, because not because I'm sick of talking, although I'm kind of sick of talking here, one of the things in the AI paper that we hit on is national security and cybersecurity, and you don't have to be prescriptive on it, but any thoughts you have on AI, how that affects this whole issue here, anything you want to ask, contribute, or I don't know, we could probably do this for 2 hours, but even just taglines here.
Well, I mean, it's to the points we've we've been making earlier is we've gone from concerns over securing the physical security of a place and then the cyber security of a place, and now we have a potential tool, artificial intelligence, that can just exponentially magnify the challenges of doing that. And so AI being used, for example, and when we say things like hostile foreign actors, I mean, there are folks in America that can perpetuate these attacks. Sure. We're just seeing that they are very often coming from without the United States. And so if they do come from places, for example, where maybe English is a second language or is not, their first language, tools like AI can be used to make those sort of social engineering attacks more realistic, and they can be done on a much wider scale rather than you copy and paste in and you send out I got to manually go in 50,000 emails and all this stuff. It can be done at scale. And so that's a concern, that we have to look at how that technology can be used in this kind of way. Things like, deep fakes and voice cloning are also things that we've talked about. Can you want to hit on the Singapore story? For folks who have made it this far in the podcast, I don't know how far in we are. You want this story? This story is insane. We're going to talk about Singapore, and you read my mind. You knew where I was going, and so the incident in Singapore is, I think, is a troubling and a big ticket example of what can happen in other areas. So there is a worker at a financial company in Singapore, and is contacted by someone purporting to be the CFO and wants some kind of $25 million transfer or something like that. And the guy's has some pause. He's a little concerned, and they end up having a Zoom meeting, and you're hearing voices and you're seeing people in the background, and it makes it seem like this person really is. Any red flags that went up were very calmed. And so they end up getting scammed. This person gets scammed out of $25 million. And that is, again, it goes to the sophistication of how these AI technologies can be used to perpetuate these deep fakes. And $25 million scam is a huge deal. Look at how that can be used in this sort of space. The mayor of the town, calls up, the engineer working at the water plant or something like this and says, hey, we heard this thing, do this or do that. And you can trick someone into doing something that they may not otherwise do because of the sophistication of the technology. So those are also, those things are big concerns. And so we talk about that at great length in the AI paper. It will be something that as we engage at hearings on AI with the select committee, other committees that sort of are in this sort of this sort of space and jurisdiction that we'll need to talk about and make people aware of. And it's just amazing. It's a great technology that can do a lot of things, but this is an area where it can wreak some real havoc.
Yeah, that's in the scariness is not lost on me. And I just think back to, when we had Chair Capriglione and Senator Parker and we're talking about some of the threats. I mean, just imagine you're on a Zoom with 4 other people.
Yep.
And you're sufficiently convinced by all 4 people that this is a real conversation.
Yes. Voice mannerisms, things,
knowing things about you,
and that goes into the degree of the research that goes into trying to scam someone. It's made real, right?
Yep.
It's a deep fake, but it is so real. And we're getting out of the cybersecurity space, but we can talk about it. We even have examples where kids are calling their mothers and screaming in the background, I got in a car accident, this guy's threatening to kidnap me unless you go to the Walmart and send him $2,000 via Western Union. These sort of things are happening. Things have happened like this to mothers in Arizona, a woman in St. Louis County in Missouri. These things are real. So we'll talk about those things in other areas, but for purposes of critical infrastructure, to your point, it's amazing where we've gone from physical to digital cybersecurity, and the potential for AI being used as a cataclysmic tool in this space.
you know, if I can, I normally don't read direct quotes, but I think this is a good way to end what's been a great discussion. And there's one of my favorite podcasts is Lex Fridman, and he used to end his with poetry, often very, you know, nihilistic and not nihilistic, but contemplative. This is pretty staggeringly nihilistic. So I'm sorry to leave you with this all, but bringing it back to how bad is it? In critical infrastructure, there's this technology called SCADA. I'm not going to bore our audience. It's supervisory control and data acquisition software. Basically, it allows for the centralization of our infrastructure system, so there isn't that stovepiping. So this department can communicate with this one on a water system.
That's really good, right?
It's really you think it's great, right? Yeah. Communication. You know, what organization doesn't want better internal communication? So the Department of Energy, this is a few years ago, you know, they analyzed SCADA and how it's now enmeshed in every one of our critical infrastructure systems. And, you know, this was done decades ago, and it was cool. This is convenient, and this is efficient. So I'm going to read this and think about what you would do if you're Xi Jinping ready to unleash war on America, and you're wondering, what is the lowest hanging fruit for me? All right, So this is the Department of Energy on SCADA. By allowing the collection and analysis of data and control of equipment such as pumps and valves from remote locations, SCADA networks provide great efficiency and are widely used. Sounds great, right?
Great.
But wait, there's more. They also present a security risk. SCADA networks were initially designed to maximize functionality with little attention paid to security. As a result, performance, reliability, flexibility, and safety of distributed control or SCADA systems are robust, while the security of these systems is often weak.
Yep.
This is a crisis.
Yes.
And when we talk about some of the highest priority policy goals of the foundation, we think about what's going to make the biggest difference on the lives of Texans. We are literally talking about the posterity of our state, of our nation, because if China's seeing, this is the vector for me to get in, I guarantee that any numbers, any statistics, you can look at my research on this, a written testimony, there's some great harrowing statistics on it. It is being dwarfed by the reality because we don't even know how much they are in our systems. So we're optimistic because there are so many venues and formats to have these discussions during the interim. We're not screaming into the void. Lawmakers in the House and Senate are listening. The big three are listening. Folks are ready to act on this. And I think, ending optimistically, at least what I believe, and I know we're on the same page with this, when you see both chambers working together as much as they are on issues like protecting our critical water systems, we've testified in Senate, Water, Ag, and Rural Affairs, in this House Select Committee. We're hearing from offices in both chambers and in different states, by the way, that, hey, Texas is a leader on this. They are ready to step up, act, and lead on this next session because this is unacceptable in Texas.
It is, and I think, you know, there's sort of three ways you can look at it. You talked about the bicameral. Sometimes there's friction between House and Senate on things, and that's not unique to Texas. We had that in Iowa as well. There's often the friction between Republicans and Democrats. Surprise, surprise. But one of the interesting things that I recognized when I got to the Senate representing a rural district is sometimes there's friction between urban and rural areas. And again, I think we'll hopefully talk about that as we talk about in the future some of our interest in rural revitalization efforts. But this is an issue that it cuts across all three of those lines. It's bicameral, it's bipartisan, and it is not it's not a function of how big or small of a city or what corner of Texas you come from. It impacts everyone everywhere. And then, I would say, I know we kind of dumped on, AI as a potential threat, but using that proactively, using AI to, assess AI and using it in a good way to help protect and harden, those vectors by which people can get in. I think that's something that's really important, and I think that's hopefully we'll be part of, some of the work that comes out of the AI Advisory Council, for example, some of the recommendations they make to state government about how they use that technology responsibly. So this was a great conversation. It's so great to be back in the studio. Jefferson, great to see you behind the camera.
You just broke the fourth wall.
I know, I broke the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. So why don't we end it there? And this was a great conversation. Thank you for all the work that you've put into that, and hopefully for the audience, it was a valuable conversation. So we will end there, and that will be all for this week's episode. Want to thank you for joining us. In future episodes, we'll continue to dive into more of the policy issues that lawmakers should consider going into the 2025 legislative session. We'll see you again soon for another episode of the widely watched and highly successful and much talked about Rebel Tech Podcast.